So, hi there. I'm Veronica Monet, and this is the Shame Free Zone. And we're taking on a topic that's actually got me a little bit jittery right now because it's hitting a little close to the core of some of my own issues. But luckily, we have a wonderful guide with us. My friend Marcella Raimondo is here. She's actually an expert on eating disorders and body image. And I am going to read just a little bit about her so that we know who's going to be guiding us on this gnarly journey around how do we feel about our bodies and what's our relationship with food. So, Marcella Raimondo is a psychologist, consultant, and trainer, and she's been speaking on social justice and eating disorders since 1995. From 1997 to 2005, Marcella served as the director of media literacy for About Face, which was a nonprofit organization that addresses media impact on body image. I said was, they're actually still in existence. And today
Mhm.
she's on their board as one of the founders. She's also on the advisory board for the Association of Size Health and Diversity, and on the advisory board for Eating Disorder Recovery Support as their past president. And she serves as co chair of the Academy of Eating Disorders, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I mean, we really tapped into the right person here. Um, she currently serves as a licensed clinical psychologist in Kaiser Permanente's Eating Disorder Clinic in Oakland, and she runs a private practice as well. I don't know where she finds time with all this stuff. Um, Marcella doesn't come to us as an expert, though, and I think it's really important to know that she herself has suffered from an eating disorder in the form of anorexia nervosa, and she recovered over 20 years ago. So, who better to tell us about how to do this? Now, she's got an interesting twist on this. I've never heard of anybody who incorporates martial arts as a potential treatment for eating disorders, but we'll get into that. I just want to welcome Marcella to the show right now and into the shame free zone where we're going to take on a
Wow.
topic that creates a lot of shame for a lot of us. And that's the food that we put on our plate and in our mouth, and also what we see looking back at us when we see ourselves in the mirror. A lot of us have strong emotional responses to all of those things. I
Mhm.
wonder, Marcella, if we could
Yes.
start by, because we're now very impressed with you as a
Uh-huh.
professional on this topic, but I want to let everybody get to know you as a person, because I find you to be just incredibly approachable and down to earth. Maybe we could start with a little bit about your journey with anorexia.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you. And first of all, Veronica, I want to say thank you so much for having me here on your show and also just the shame-free zone. It's like, wow, wow. I will say if there is one feeling that if a magic genie came to me and said, you get to eliminate one feeling in this world, I would be like shame. I wouldn't hesitate, nothing. I'd be like just shame. So yeah, so thank you, and thank you for creating this space.
Hmm. My my pleasure. So
Um,
welcoming you into it to be
Thank you.
as vulnerable as you feel safe to do.
Hmm. So you asked me about my own journey and my own recovery
Yeah.
from anorexia. Um, and yeah, I will say, wow, I give a lot of talks, but at times like to really come in on my personal journey, it's like trying to really take like a step back and kind of like just sink into that heart space of what that was like, because I will tell you that those were probably the worst 10 years of my life, no doubt. My the amount of fear that I lived in, the amount of obsession that I lived in, the what felt like a very contained and closed and very punitive box that I was in with my eating disorder, the amount of sadness that
Mm,
I had,
mm,
and getting to a point where I realized that um, I was miserable and I was terrified to let go of my eating disorder.
mm,
And I was also starting to get scared of I could die from this. And every single and it started to come to a point where it was like facing those things every single day, and what felt like so conflictual, and like how can I hold all these opposing feelings of like there's no way in the world I want to give up my eating disorder, I'm absolutely terrified, and then the feeling of and I'm so miserable, and
mm,
then the feeling of I could die, and then started to grow a part of me that was saying, I want life. I want freedom. I want liberation. I want to sit with someone and be present with them. I
mm,
want to sit with food and enjoy it. I
mm,
want to sit with myself and be okay with that. I want to sit in connection to others. So there just came this desire for liberation and for connection, and
mm,
it started to grow.
mm,
And I'm putting this in an absolute, like, really linear nutshell. Like, and then I had this, and then boom, I was like, no. I think many of us know the path of healing is never linear. It feels like the not like you take steps backwards, but like you take steps and you realize, oh my God, there's so much more to this path. Or you take a step and you're like, there's so many angles here. Oh wow, I wasn't expecting this, and you're sitting here going, and I have no choice but to just keep moving forward. I just have. I saw this great quote today about recovery and talking about like frostbite hurts, and frostbite when you get frostbite for being in the cold, and it hurts, and it's like this sting, but then it'll it'll subside, and you won't have that the sting of frostbite. But we all know, like, you don't cure frostbite by running back into the blizzard, and that was the quote, and I was like, oh yeah. And so just that reminder of, yeah, that the recovery, um I always tell folks, like, it's, of course it's not fun, of course it's bringing so much up, but it is worth it. It
mhm.
it it absolutely is worth it. Um, uh, yeah,
You know, thank you for sharing that.
sure.
I suffered from, and I don't know if I want to use past tense because what I want to say about eating disorder and my own, how it shows up in my own life, it was something that I entered into before I discovered cocaine. But it got triggered because I went to interview for a job as a trainer, and the guy asked me to lose 10 pounds. And I was horrified because I had just very meticulously put those 10 pounds on to satisfy all the people back home in Oregon who thought I was too skinny.
Mhm.
And now he thought I was too fat. So I went on this extreme diet, and it literally was just lettuce, non fat, low, 0 calorie salad dressing with diet Dr. Pepper. And I lived off of that, and I lost a bunch of weight, and I took some photos and I thought I looked really good in them. But that wasn't enough. So I started doing cocaine, and then I was like, I was weighing myself 3 to 5 times a day. And I was really sensitive to the fact that you could put a pound on in the morning from water weight. And so then when I do my cocaine, I try to dehydrate myself to get my weight down.
Mm.
Um, and I recently looked up a picture from that time period. Now, mind you, I was just hanging out with other cokeheads. And so we were all slender, but I was the skinniest person in the picture. And I felt fat that day. So I never got rid of that feeling, no matter how much weight I lost. I just thought I was, I weighed too much. And friends were complaining, and it was an interesting psychological reaction I had to friends. My other cokehead friends who were also skinny said, "We're really worried about you. You're losing a lot of weight." And my response would always be to starve myself more. I just wanted
Mm,
to eat even less. Now, I fortunately got clean and sober when I was 25. So this whole thing went on for about 3 years. But my relationship with food at this particular time in my life is basically I eat very healthy. I eat at least two really good meals a day, and sometimes three. But if I get triggered emotionally, I forget to eat. So whereas other people eat because they're sad or frightened or whatever, I just, I'll like the whole day goes by and I go, hey, wait a minute, I haven't eaten. Um, so I know it's something that is sometimes for some of us associated with trauma,
mm,
and for me that's certainly the case. So I have to really watch myself. I have to be careful that if I've had a traumatic encounter, say with my mother can push my buttons, and I'll just
yeah.
immediately flip into not eating.
Hmm.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit about this trauma. Um, and how often does this play a part with people who have eating disorders, whether they are prone towards anorexia or overeating?
Is your so your like is your question about just
Well,
people
I
being,
I shared, this is a
yeah,
safe free zone. One of the things I do is I share freely from my own life.
right.
Um, and a lot of that is because I want to give people a lot of ease to kind of delve into their own life.
Mm,
So
right.
we can kind of skate the surface here and talk about numbers and statistics. I really want to get into the emotions. And I'm curious when you're working with people who have eating disorders, and if there's something you want to share
Mm,
from your own journey
right.
too, what are the emotions that
I
drive
see.
our fraught relationship with food?
Mm. Well, I'm thinking about like when I work with folks with eating disorders, I really want to hear their eating disorder story.
Mm,
I really want to hear, like, because in many ways, what they're sharing is how much their eating disorder saved them. They're sharing that there is a purpose and a function for their eating disorder, and so for many folks talking about relationships they've had, relationships with caregivers, relationships with meaningful people in their life, and how the uh, you know, there, and some folks come from a very traumatic past, absolutely. And some folks come from relationships that were perhaps confusing for them, perhaps conflictual for them, perhaps where care and caregiving was was done in like confusing ways, was done in kind of conditional ways. So they will talk about that.
mm,
For other folks, they talk about how they they were at a place where they were told to like their feelings didn't count, their feelings didn't matter, who they were, they being in a place where being pretty in, invalidated, and so and there's often talk, or what I hear, and what really upsets me a lot is when people say, something about my work, and they're like, yeah, people with eating disorders are just like control freaks. And
yeah.
that really upsets me. And I have to tell folks, like, well, actually, people with eating disorders are incredibly flexible. and they've had to
Oh,
hold a
oh,
lot of chaos in their lives, and they've had to manage a lot. And so pretty much every person with an eating disorder will tell me, like, this is the one area in my life where I actually can manage, where I actually do have control over it, where I actually have a say of how things are going to go, because they tell me about their other lives, and their other lives are very chaotic, and they're trying to manage a lot.
oh, fascinating. It's interesting because I'd always heard that, especially anorexia is about control. And I identified with that. I thought about, yeah, I mean, like counting calories and
Sure.
turning down food takes a lot of control. Tuning out your hunger impulse takes a lot of control. But you're right, Marcella, because that particular time in my life was incredibly chaotic. I'm sure you can imagine with being surrounded by a lot of cocaine use and indulging in it. Yeah,
Right.
we had a lot of emergencies, and there was DUIs and domestic violence. So yeah,
Right.
it was very chaotic.
Right.
Yeah.
And another, I have been doing a meal support on Instagram Live
Mhm.
during the pandemic, and so it was me eating my breakfast with folks that would just kind of tune in. And I will say I learned so much. And one thing that speaking about the emotional part, which we one time, I remember this live where we talked about hunger and
Mm.
people being afraid of being hungry and afraid of food and afraid. And the more we talked about it, it was recognizing the metaphor of hunger, and what folks were realizing, and what I was being pulled as to say was like, so what you're saying by being afraid of hunger is that you're afraid of telling people that you have needs, and that you're afraid to show that vulnerability in you, because hunger is kind of opening yourself and saying, I'm vulnerable, I need comfort, I need nourishment. And I'm like, so it sounds like that was scary for you. And if you didn't have those, if you didn't have someone attuned to your hunger,
Right.
why would you want to admit you're hungry? To only be
Yes.
hurt. And so I remember that live, and how I was like, wow, this is really powerful, because it was something I had never said before, but folks were really like, we just went deeper and deeper to talk about hunger
Yeah.
and why hunger is so scary for folks, and recognizing, sure, there's this like physical hunger for food, and but yet admitting that I have needs, I'm vulnerable. And then folks often say, like, but if I start eating, I'll never stop. And also that, like, no, you can regulate yourself, you can know, you can trust your body. And um so that I just remember that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're talking some about anorexia, but I know you work with all eating disorders.
Yes.
And is the emotional landscape similar between anorexics and overeaters, or is there a difference?
I would say, um, with folks with anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, and all kinds of configurations, there are a lot of similarities. They in terms of in terms of using food, not using food, as a way to cope, as a way to regulate one's emotions,
Mm.
as a way to soothe, and as a way to check out. People talk about, like, during my eating disorder, I get to check out. Yeah.
What I noticed for me when I do um, um, tip over into that anorexic pattern, I'm running off of adrenaline instead of food.
Mm.
and it actually gets me high. So, and I've been clean and sober for over 35 years, and I now call that my, it's like, oh, I'm trying to get high off of my own adrenaline. And it's kind of a little reminiscent. It's not the same at all, but a little
Mhm.
reminiscent of running off of cocaine. It's like, well, I don't need food, and then I feel superhuman. Um, so yeah, I think it can definitely check out from your emotions. You're not in your body anymore, so you're not actually subject to painful feelings.
Mhm.
And does it work that way also with overeating?
Um, I would say with folks with binge eating, yeah, absolutely, and that folks are coming in and telling me too, like, I get to check out. My life is so chaotic. My I ha- folks folks come in with a lot of trauma, so much trauma, and tell me that this is my way to cope, and um, and so many times in recovery, sure, we are working on addressing the actual eating disorder behaviors, but we are also talking about like how do we also look at the quality of your life, and how do we start to create a life that is meaningful for you. It it starts to get complicated when we start to bring in diet culture, because diet culture gets in the way of recovery time and time and time again.
And diet is actually something that filters down into, um, at least I've read statistics for girls. I don't know how it might be affecting boys, but girls as young as like 8 years old that are hating their body and going on diets. Maybe you could tell me if that statistic is right or if you have better data than that.
That statistic is right in terms of the messages we are giving our youngsters, and in terms of the messages we're giving ourselves and each other, and looking at just what is, like, diet culture is so entrenched in capitalism. Diet culture is so entrenched in white supremacy. Diet culture is so toxic. And that it is absolutely relentless in keeping you starved and deprived and unhappy, and honestly deceiving you, because diets don't work. The body does not understand food deprivation, and so you know I don't know a single person who has succeeded in diet culture, without having an eating disorder.
Yeah, so let's back up a little bit because I want to.
Yeah.
It may not be intuitive some of the things that you were associating with diet culture. I can kind of take one at a time here. So um, I think you mentioned racism. That
Mhm.
is racist. So unpack that for us. Help us understand.
Mm. Diet culture is, I'm gonna, like, just change my position because I just have so much to say about it.
Yes.
Diet culture is so, like, I was saying, like, diet culture is embedded in white supremacy, in that it is based on creating, just this, like, one ideal. It's very capitalist. It's also creating an ideal that is so inaccessible. It's also diet culture, like, creates all these systems of oppression when it comes to bodies, in terms of bodies that are held, as, I'll just say, bodies that are held as ideal, and just very very privileged bodies, versus bodies that are targeted and held as extremely problematic. Um, Diet culture creates food that, diet culture creates like healthy foods versus unhealthy foods. So you then start to label and judge how you eat, and the messages that we give ourselves when we start to eat like what we considered unhealthy foods. And so it starts to create that aspect, or just that kind of thinking. Diet culture puts a lot of morality on food, and like, if you're not eating this, what are you doing? If And so, and also a lot of foods that are deemed healthy, or like, are also quite expensive. And also looking at the roots of, where did this food come from? And so I have a lot of like my many of my colleagues, like Gloria Lucas of Nalgona Positivity Pride, and Sonia Renee Taylor of The Body Is Not an Apology. These are two folks that really talk about the intersections of white supremacy, the intersections of race.
Right.
Like, because like, when we look at who has an eating disorder, it also says like, well, they're like thin, rich white girls, and like, that's not true. When we look at some of our highest prevalence of eating disorders, are transgender folks.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, like, we're not getting it right by a long shot. Um,
Okay. Wow.
yeah,
And I understand that there's a rise in eating disorders, particularly the anorexic eating disorder with boys and young men too, who are really trying to get the ripped ab look.
right. The ripped ab look, also just ways that they're getting messages about their bodies. Like, for some of these boys, they were actually kids in larger bodies that were teased, and now here they are, with like really struggling with their relationship with food.
Mm,
They've also, a lot of boys and men, don't use, like, they do a lot of restrictive eating and exercise, as opposed to taking, let's say, laxatives, or engaging in purging behaviors.
right.
And so their behaviors are seen as like, these are optimal behaviors. These are great behaviors. Like, if they go to their doctor and say like, well, I'm cutting out the fats and I'm exercising more, their doctor would say, well, good job, keep it up.
Mhm.
As opposed to asking, like, well, how much food are you cutting out? And how much exercise are you doing?
Right.
And so, asking, instead of saying good job, saying, do you exercise when you're sick? Do you miss social events so that you can get your exercise in? Like, those are the questions to ask when someone's like, I am just really exercising, and exercising is my life. It's like, tell me about that, because exercise is great and good for you and fun,
Yeah.
but is it taking over? Then we're like, okay, let's look at your relationship to exercise.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting question about how do we know if we are adopting healthy behaviors or if it's tipping over into a disorder. And I wonder too if maybe, I don't know if there's a place for a word like addiction in this scenario, like you getting addicted to a particular um, exercise where it starts to take over your life. That's the word that came to my mind. Uh,
Right.
yeah.
It's so interesting that people talk about sugar addiction. Like, and I'm like, well, I let's really take a look at that. But yet, looking at eating disorders as like, hey, there is an addictive aspect to this. Exercise can be addictive. Your eating disorder has, and not to label, but more to say, because I don't want us to get like hung up on words, but yet to point out like, hey, we need to take eating disorders quite seriously, in fact. And when someone has this relationship with food where, it feels like there's an obsession, and there's just a kind of a mindset around it, and there's a relationship with food and exercise that seems like it is kind of shutting the person down as well as disconnecting the person, then
Yes.
it's like let's actually start to take this seriously, because it's removing people from themselves and from each other,
Mm.
and restriction is not good for the body. Like we then that and that's also like where white supremacy comes in, is that white supremacy holds eating disorder behaviors as these are great, like restrict, exercise, and like wait, let's, like
So say more.
activity is great.
So
Oh,
say more about how restriction isn't healthy for the body.
the
Or-
body, first of all, I'm not a physician, but yet knowing like the body, first of all, doesn't understand restriction. The body doesn't, and also the body doesn't like it. And it's not good for the body, even though we are constantly being told to cut out foods, cut out foods, cut out foods. Um, and people have argued with me like, but so many of us overeat, overeat, overeat. I'm like, yeah, well, we live in a country where our relationship with food and what we're shown are kind of like a lot of extremes. And so, sure, we can talk about some extremes that we have,
Mhm.
but yet we seem to operate in such, extremes of like, we just like, we'll see like excess sugary foods, and then our approach is like, well, then let's just cut this all out completely. And I'm like, well, there's a room for dessert in our lives, and there's a room to have desserts that we like and that are yummy and delicious, because actually our brains and our bodies like pleasure. I mean, we need pleasure. um,
And
um,
you work with people who also overeat. I'm wondering how do they find balance?
for folks who are binging, it's more so much as, often, well, first of all, for a lot of folks who, there's folks with binge eating disorder, and we're talking about these are folks with so much trauma, and also, one is their relationship to food, but two is just the quality of life that they are having, and how many ways they find their lives so intolerable. And so we have one aspect, and then we have people who come in, and I've worked with people who tell me, I overeat, I I can't stop. And then I do, well, let's do a 24-hour food recall and tell me what you're eating. And what I hear is a lot of restricting and a lot of food deprivation. And then they tell me like at night, I just get I start eating, and I can't stop. And
Aha.
often when I work with folks, I'm like, well, we need to start bringing in some pleasurable foods, during the day. And these are for folks that I will say have the privilege, and the access to foods. And so these are folks that can actually buy some foods. And so I remember working with, a couple of folks, and having to work, with one particular person, like we have to get in foods, like you got to get breakfast in. We got to have a meaningful lunch in, and
Right.
and 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 you have to have like your breakfast and lunch have to be, a meal that you enjoy,
Mhm.
and sometimes you don't, and that is life. Sometimes we have a meal because we're busy, we're running around, and we have a lunch, and we're kind of like, I really didn't like this lunch, but it is what it is. But
Mhm.
yet with some folks saying like, okay, but yet I have enough yummy lunches where I am okay, every once in a while, like, yeah, this lunch really didn't hit the spot, you
Yeah.
know. But I work with folks saying like we got to get food in during the day.
So what I'm
Um,
hearing you say is that timing is important. So particularly for people who are binging, they may starve themselves all day, and then the body is really in starvation mode and driving them to overeat at night, and also maybe their emotions that they haven't dealt with and kind of go into the binging.
right.
So I'm hearing also bringing pleasure. So what I kind of translate that to quality over quantity. So and maybe a more mindful connection to eating. Is does that feel like a fit for what you're saying?
Um, Mindful quality, enjoying their food, and giving themselves permission to enjoy food,
Yeah.
and also really pointing out that we live in a culture where we are shamed. I feel like we get such conflictual messages around food, like seeing ads for all kinds of gooey cakes and ice cream and all that, and yet the message that we get around eating that is like, this is unhealthy. And so I'm like I I was like, wow, like if I just went on what I saw and what I saw in our environment, I was like, I'd be so confused, because I'm being like bombarded with food, but I'm also being told not to eat that food. And so
Mhm.
it's just like, wow, how confusing is that?
That is confusing. One of the things that so we've been talking about the diet industry as a potential contributor in capitalism and racism. What about body image? Because that sometimes it can feel like a very personal thing to an individual. They've got certain things about their body maybe that they don't like. And I'm just wondering if you, in your practice and in your activism, work with people around their body images and what kind of body images come up and how people can work around their body images.
Yeah, body image is it always comes up. It is part of the journey as well. And so
Yeah.
like the ways, and also like the way diet industry like causes that, and the way diet industry like influences, and people talk about their relationship to their bodies, and talk about, for some folks, there have been times where they haven't been connected to their bodies, and it was
Mhm.
unsafe to be connected, and it was scary, and it was scary to have needs. I mean, our bodies are also like metaphors and vessels for how we navigate in the world, and how we connect to ourselves, and how we connect to others. And when that's taken away, it's scary to be in your body. And so working with folks, because they talk about like, I am terrified of weight gain, and we talk about like, well, what, tell me about it. And I try to strip away, like, let's forget about diet culture right now, and tell me your relationship, like what is scary about being in your body, and what is scary about weight gain. And folks will talk about an emotional part, and talk about the vulnerability, and then we start to bring in diet culture as well, because we just can't not bring in diet culture. Like when I work with folks, and they tell me that, like, Marcella, I I'm a person that, if I recover from my eating disorder, I will I will be in a large body, in what society considers a large body, and I'm going to get rejected,
Mm,
and having to acknowledge, that aspect. And
yeah.
so, and saying like, yes, I hear you on that.
Mm,
And I absolutely hear that we live in a society fraught with weight stigma, and I'm not asking you to take it on, but
mm,
I am asking you to say, like, I hope you and your body, and that liberation would be worth it to you,
mhm,
despite what our society says. And I work with a lot of folks, in marginalized bodies, who tell me things like, but Marcella, if I
mm,
recover and gain weight, society doesn't want a fat person of color, or I get misgendered as a transgender or non-binary person, or I mean, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I am older, and so people, I'm already invisible, but if I'm thin, I'm less invisible. And so
Yeah.
that's what a lot of folks talk about with body image, and we have those dialogues, and a
Yeah.
lot of it is just like sitting in that space and saying like, hey, we need to acknowledge that we are in these systems of oppression, and yet you have a right to recover and you have a right to be you. And even if our society doesn't support it, you have a right to be you, and you have a right to, and even if yeah, society doesn't support it, there are ways that services are inaccessible. Like you have a right to all these things,
Mhm, mhm.
because you have a right to be in your body, and you have a right to have access to food, and you have a right to like your food, and you have a right to connect to yourselves and others through your body. These are rights.
Yeah, when you talk about connecting to your body, I know I mentioned briefly at the very beginning, they've got a very unusual way of suggesting a potential path. I'm not saying that all your patients take this path, but it's certainly one that you've taken, which is to use martial arts to change the relationship with your body. And I'm wondering, first of all, you practice some martial arts I had never heard of. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's Kaiju Kembo, and it's a Western eclectic mix of karate, jujitsu, judo, kempo, and Chinese boxing.
Wow.
Yes. And I am at a wonderful martial arts self defense center in Oakland, Hand to Hand, Kaiju Kembo Self Defense Center.
Yeah.
And just inspired by all the folks there, and inspired by our head instructor, Professor Sonia Richardson, and all the black belts there. They just touch me and inspire me,
Yeah.
and given me a lot of space to really think about how to use martial arts as a tool for recovery, or as a tool for prevention as well. While I don't specifically do like, let's do some punches and kicks in any of my sessions,
Yeah.
sometimes I do metaphorically talk about like, what would it be like to break through something? What would it be like to use your body? What would it be like to stop apologizing for your body? And that's something that actually I've gotten that metaphor from Sonia Renee Taylor of The Body Is Not an Apology, of like, what would we like to stop apologizing for your body? And I hold that as I hold martial arts, and think about like all the ways we hold back, and all the ways, like, what would it be like to use our bodies to really like like, what would it be like to use our bodies to like hit the pad, and what does that feel like?
So,
And so
I'm getting that martial arts could actually help someone experience their body as um, more be more embodied. So I would, to me, when I think about body image issues, there's like an obsession with what does it look like.
right,
And when I think about eating disorders, well, anorexia certainly goes towards what does it look like, but not always. Some people are just curtailing their food because of how it feels. But certainly with body image, I think a lot of it is about what does it look like. And I'm hearing you say martial arts can give us a sense of what does it feel like.
hmm,
Yeah. And is that a way to kind of move away from objectifying ourselves? Because if we're just thinking about what we look like, we really have objectified ourselves,
right,
wouldn't you say?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because martial arts is like, and I think like just so many of the messages that I have received, and that I feel like I hold, and that in ways I bring to
Mm,
my work as a psychologist, is about like, what does your body do for you? What would it be like to take up space?
mm,
What would it be like to use your body to break through something?
right.
Um, and also like what and how do you relate to others, in your body. And a lot of, a lot of what we do in martial arts is like there is a lot of contact work, and there is a lot of working with a partner, and also noticing like how do I show up in relation to others as well. And also what I have so appreciated about martial arts is like just that that it's a journey, and it's kind of like a wild journey to see, like, thinking about myself as a younger belt hitting a pad and just using like from here on,
Right.
and then now as a black belt, like using everything. 'Cause like first it was like from here on, and then I would be stuck like in here thinking about just everything, and I still get stuck here, but now noticing like wow, I'm using I'm feeling it in my heel when I'm actually throwing a punch now. And so it's just like, oh, and that has been such a journey to see like, oh wow, I am embodying like everything. And at times when I still get stuck in here, it's like, all right, what's happening that I'm stuck in here? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's great. I think we want very much to get embodied because, we're not pictures.
No, no.
We're
We
not pictures.
are we
We're
are most
three-dimensional and we're moving through the earth plane here. And there's so much we can do with these bodies, so much we can feel with these bodies,
yeah.
so much we can be with these bodies.
Yeah.
I I want to kind of circle back before we end,
Yes.
to the trauma, because
Mm.
I know from myself, uh, lots of childhood trauma. There was domestic violence, there was incest. In college, I was raped. So by the time I'm
Mm.
out of college and I developed this eating disorder, I could certainly track how that was connected to trauma. But I want to hear it from you about what kind of traumas do most people with eating disorders suffer from, and how does the trauma actually catalyze the eating disorder?
Mm. People experience all kinds of traumas, from just abuse to sexual abuse to all kinds of assaults. And I would say like people experience traumas that is like these like single episodes versus like chronic trauma, when people talk about who they are, and going into the world as a person of color, and going into the world as someone who is queer or transgender or person with a disability, and just like this is constant trauma of feeling unsafe.
Yeah.
And so I would say like the trauma, the language is around, you know, there is horrible things that have happened to folks, and absolutely, really horrible things that have happened to folks with eating disorders, and other mental illnesses as well.
Mhm.
But yes, there absolutely is trauma in folks that have had, and that have eating disorders, and some of it is in the past, and
Mhm.
so it's working with folks saying, okay, these were things that happened to you, and what do you need to be safe right now. And for other folks in marginalized bodies, it's like, okay, there is ongoing trauma. How do we help you regulate that,
Mhm.
and know that? And so that way we can find other ways to cope with the unsafety of the world that doesn't involve you harming yourself with an eating disorder.
Oh, yeah. But it's to me, it's so sad to think that we live in a world and have lived in a world for all as I mean, I think it's for, you know, as long as there's been humans, there has
Mhm.
been some way in which we pick on people because of the way they look. You know, I know a little bit about birds, and a flock of birds will sometimes peck at another bird whose plumage is different, or if they're even missing part of their plumage, they just peck at them.
Mm.
Sometimes peck them to death. And
Oh.
I look at the way humans interact with each other around our different bodies and our different appearances.
Mm.
And I've often said humans, unlike the rest of the mammals on this planet who do not do this, because certainly dogs don't, um, we're like bird brains. Uh, you know, it's,
Yeah.
it's like we're looking at something that's different and making a thing out of it.
Mm. Yeah, and that fear, as well as somehow thinking like there's such a shortage of goodness when I'm like, There's plenty of goodness to go around for everybody." Yeah, and we create that like by me showing up with my goodness and knowing like there's an abundance, then I just keep adding to it. And so that way there's never any shortage. Yeah. Yeah. I hear you on like the bird brain and like, oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to live up to our mammalian legacy here, which
Yeah.
is, it doesn't matter. But most mammals actually don't have color vision. So dogs, but I always think it's even goes beyond that because dogs don't care about size either. They're just
Hmm.
a dog's a dog as far as they're
Yeah.
concerned. I hope at some point we get to a place where people are people.
Yeah. That would be lovely.
I really appreciate you bringing your own personal story,
Oh, thank
and
you.
your political passion for this topic and your professional expertise on it into the
Hmm.
shame-free zone. And I would love for people to know how to learn more about your social justice activism around eating disorders and body image, and how they might be able to contact you. I'll be, of course, putting all your links below the YouTube, but maybe if you want to share that right now with our.
Sure. Folks, you can contact me through my website at www.marcellaedtraining.com. And you can also email me at marcellaedtraining.com. And yeah, I'd be more than happy to consult, more than happy to provide a training to your clinic and or place, and or just have a community dialogue too. It doesn't have to be a training too. I'm just all about community dialogues because we're talking about food, our bodies, liberation. Like we just need to dialogue. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
let's I'm just hoping, and I'm sure that this has helped our viewers. I'm just really wanting to get that word out there that
Oh,
we
thank
can.
you.
Yeah, we just need to love each other some more.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me here.
Thank you for having me. I
Pleasure.
this was very touching. Thank you.
Hi, me too.